welcome to this edition of Consciousness Raising Online. I'm going to jump right into this because I don't want to be real long, trying to keep this down to a decent time frame. But what I want to deal with is so important that I want to make sure I can get it all in and be clear. The title is the alternate reality to the South's lost cause. And the subtitle is why Trump has such a hold on his followers. What I need for you to understand is that what most of us see as the insanity of the followers of Trump is actually based on a real brain right now. We've had it all our lives because it's been so much a part of the American society. Okay, so I need for you to follow me with me on this because I'm going to show you some graphics as I'm talking, and as you're looking at them, allow yourself to understand that these graphics are part of what's in our subconscious and has made us actually buy into a lot of what the lost cause in it is. And I'll explain that in a minute. Okay? Now, this graphic you're looking at right now, actually, some people know it because it's the relief on Stone Mountain in Georgia. And those are Confederate generals. This is a memorial to the Confederacy. We'll come back to explain it in a little while. This is a $20 bill from the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America. And what you have to understand, here's a $100 bill. What you have to understand is that the Civil War, or the war, what is also called the War Between the States, it was a war between certain states of the United States who attempted to secede from the United States. They said, look, we're quitting the United States. And the Union said, no, you can't do that. And so they went to war over this. Here's a graphic of some generals, Confederate generals. Here's another one of, now this is Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States of America. That's the lost cause. I'll come back to that. Edward A. Pollard of Virginia. But I need for you to check this out. See, most people don't even recognize this. Okay? This is the flag of the Confederate States of America. That's the official flag. Okay? But you don't recognize it because you hardly ever see it. This is the flag you see. And that's because this is what's called the battle flag or the rebel flag. And this is the one that is used by the white supremacists, the Ku Klux Klan, and all of those Southerners who claim that the Civil War is part of their heritage. Okay? So, first of all, understand the difference because that's very important. This is not the official flag of the Confederate States of America. Okay? It was never the official flag. But here's what happened. You know, it's said that the history is written by the winners. But the Civil War has been an exception to that, because the lost cause of the Confederacy is a pseudo-historical negative ideology that advocates the belief that the cause of the Confederate States during the American Civil War was a just and heroic one. And that ideology has furthered the belief that slavery was just and moral because the enslaved were happy and even grateful. And also slavery brought economic prosperity. Now, I'm telling you this because, even though you know this, but I need for you to understand how deep this is. This is the belief. This is the belief of many, if not most, white Southerners. And by osmosis, it's also in the minds of a certain amount of black people, especially Southerners, who've been under the thumb of white people in particular, especially if they had to work with them for long periods of time. And why this is so important is because of this. The lost cause is what fuels the anger, the hatred that you see playing out right now. Most of that is being, especially when you talk about the Republican Party, that is so underneath Trump. Those are mostly Southerners, mostly. And they're mostly the racist Southerners who adhere to the lost cause. And I keep saying that because what's going to happen is you're going to see in a few minutes how deeply that's ingrained. It's ingrained in a whole lot of ways. But it didn't get there by accident. It was not a coincidence. It was intentionally done. And one of the groups that pushed it was called the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The United Daughters of the Confederacy. Now, the Lost Cause had two main periods. The first main wave was just after, or during and after World War I, because a lot of the Confederates, soldiers and veterans were dying off. And so the United Daughters of the Confederacy wanted to make sure that their memories were preserved for future generations. And the second wave of the Lost Cause was in reaction to the Civil Rights Movement in the 50s and 60s. Yeah, it wasn't back in the war. It was during the 50s and 60s. And they pushed it because that was a direct threat to the Lost Cause. Think about it. A lot of the Civil Rights Movement took place where? In the South. And because it was seen as dangerous to that whole idea. Okay? See, again, it wasn't no accident. Now, when I say these waves took place, and I'm going to show you a short video in a minute. But the video moves fairly quickly, so I want to prepare you for certain things to keep your eye out for. The Lost Cause basically portrayed the Confederacy's cause as being noble and its leaders as exemplars of old-fashioned chivalry, protecting white women, the Southern flower. You know, there's a whole lot of lynchings based around that idea, right? It also portrayed the South as being more Christian than those greedy Northerners. And just to show you how deep this went, there's three things I got to mention before we go to the video. They pushed the idea that the slaves were happy so much that the United Daughters of the Confederacy had a faithful slave memorial erected. And they had a whole committee, a faithful slave memorial committee. Now, there was a film called The Birth of a Nation. The Birth of a Nation was the first film ever shown in the White House. And the next day was shown to the entire Supreme Court, 38 senators, and the Secretary of the Navy. Now, The Birth of a Nation was based on a book called The Klansman, written by a dude named Dixon. And the Klansman developed the true story of the Ku Klux Klan conspiracy, which overturned Reconstruction. And there's certain things in the Klansman that the real Klan, because the Klan had sort of ebbed, went through ebbs and flows, right? Well, it sort of ebbed for a minute, and the Klansman, and then the Birth of a Nation came out, and it led to an uptick of the Ku Klux Klan. I gave some examples of why that's so important. In the Klansman and then in the movie, The Birth of a Nation, that's the first time that the Klan burned crosses. This guy Dixon made that up in the Klansman. And then after that, the Klan started doing that. They never burned crosses before that. So there was a lot. And if you've never seen the Birth of a Nation, go to YouTube sometime and look it up, because it'll really mess you up, because it was sick. And by the way, in Birth of a Nation, all the black people are played by white people in blackface. All of them. Ain't no black people in it. And when you see it, you say, wait, they played this in the White House? They played this for the senators? Yes, they did. And it became an extremely popular movie. It became a defining movie about the South and about the Klan, and thus about the Confederacy. And it pushed the idea that the Confederacy never really lost. It was overrun by the greedy Northerners, and that they didn't lose. What the Lost Cause says really is that they sort of like agreed to a ceasefire in order to preserve the Union. And why that's important is that it falls right in line with Trump, with this idea that he didn't lose. Okay, real quick, one other thing. There was a movie that so much defined the Lost Cause, and so many people bought into it without even understanding what they were buying into. It was Gone with the Wind. It was a novel by Margaret Mitchell, first published in 1936. And the story is set in Clayton County and Atlanta. And I lived in Atlanta. And I understand why they love that. And it dealt with the Civil War and Reconstruction. And it revolves around the story of Scarlett O'Hara, who is the spoiled daughter of a well-to-do plantation owner, right? and she had to climb out of poverty after the war and stuff. And it's so silly. But here's the thing I'll never forget about Gone with the Wind. Much as I hate the movie, and Hattie McDaniel won a Oscar medal. She didn't get a trophy, but it has nothing to do with the actual movie. Carol Burnett, she's a comedian, and I will never, ever, ever forget. She had a comedy show for years, and one of the funniest bits I ever saw on television was Carol Burnett when she did a spoof on Gone with the Wind. And what happens is there's a scene in Gone with the Wind where Scarlett O'Hara has to come out and get dressed for something to meet Red Butler or some stuff. And I don't know how it plays in the movie, but in the skit that Carol Burnett does, she snatches off a big old curtain, a drapery, and she wears this drapery down the steps with the bar in it and everything, the hanging bar and everything. And it is so silly, but she plays it to the bust, just like in reality, the silliness of Scarlett O'Hara in that movie. And see, remember, if you've never seen the movie, I'll tell you this much. The movie portrays these black women, these enslaved black women, as caring more about the plantation and Scarlett O'Hara than themselves, and basically that they're happy being slaves. Okay? Now, here's what I want to do. I want you to watch this short video. It goes over some of the things I already talked about, but it's important that you follow it because you're going to see how much of this you actually have in your subconscious already. Yeah, we actually have a lot of that Southern lost cause politics and theology and all of that in our heads. And if you got folks from the South, or if you're from the South, you recognize yourself. All right, here's the video.
Listen to how this textbook describes slavery.
The master often had a barbecue or a picnic for his slaves. Then they had a great frolic. Even while working in the cotton fields, they sang songs. The beat of the music and the richness of their voices made work seem light.
Yikes, that's from History of Georgia, a textbook published in 1954 that was taught across junior high schools in Georgia for decades. That sort of language is part of an intellectual movement called the Lost Cause, a distorted version of American Civil War history that's been prevalent in the South for a long time. It took shape soon after the defeat of the Confederate States in the war, when Southern historians like Edward Pollard and former Confederate General Jubal Early started preserving the South's perspective through their writings. They framed the Confederate cause as a heroic defense of the Southern way of life against the overwhelming forces in the North. That narrative has a few basic tenets: the glorification of Confederate soldiers who died for a cause they believed in, the belief that slavery was a benevolent institution, and maybe most importantly, that slavery was not the root cause of the war. The Lost Cause is one of the most notoriously effective efforts to rewrite history, and it was done by the losing side. So how did it become so deeply rooted in Southern memory? Blame the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The UDC was founded in Nashville in 1894 to preserve Confederate culture for generations to come. The women who made up the group descended from elite antebellum families, and they used their social and political clout to spread the pro-Southern version of the war as real history. You've probably seen their efforts to honor the Confederacy, but maybe you didn't know it was the UDC. They're the ones who covered the Southern landscape with memorials for Confederate leaders and soldiers. They used their fundraising and lobbying skills to pressure local governments into erecting monuments in prominent public spaces like courthouses and state capitals.
Installed here next to the state capitol by the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy donated this memorial to the city back in the 30s.
They put them along roadsides and in parks. Any place that was remotely relevant to the Confederacy was memorialized. By the early 20th century, the UDC had 100,000 members in chapters spread all over the country, but mostly in former Confederate states. And there's a reason they grew so quickly during that time.
So we're talking about roughly 3 decades after the end of the war, and the Confederate veterans themselves are beginning to die off. So
there's a rhetoric around monuments that we want to get this thing built before all of that generation has died off. And the reason we want it is to teach future generations about those men.
Dr. Karen Cox wrote the book on the UDC, and I asked her if it was fair to say the group established the lost cause as historical fact in the South.
Oh my God, yeah. They were the leaders of the lost cause into the 20th century, and they made it a movement about vindication.
Just to give you an idea of how effective they were, they successfully lobbied for a Confederate memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, which U.S. President Woodrow Wilson proudly unveiled to a cheering crowd. Now that's influence, right?
Monuments are the least of what they did.
What?
I mean, they are the most visible and tangible, but the work with children was far more influential.
It turns out a central UDC objective is shaping how children think about the war and their Southern heritage. One of their most powerful tools? Textbooks. Take a look at this pamphlet called A Measuring Rod for Textbooks. It was written by the illustrious Southern historian Miss Mildred Rutherford, an educator, orator, and author of Southern history textbooks. She's also very pro-slavery. The pamphlet announced the formation of a textbook review committee featuring prominent Southerners like 5 former Confederate generals. This group was committed to spreading the truths of Confederate history, so they instructed school boards to reject any textbooks that did not accord full justice to the South. And they urged libraries to deface every book in their collection that didn't measure up by writing the words "unjust to the South" clearly on its cover. This pamphlet was shared widely with school boards throughout the South, and UDC-backed committees closely monitored history books to make sure Northern influence never reached classrooms. So the core language of an approved textbook aligned precisely with that of the lost cause. You know, stuff like,
"The Confederacy lost in the war between the states, but Georgia never forgot to honor her Confederate soldiers."
History of Georgia was on the UDC's approved list. It was also written by E. Merton Coulter, a self-described Southern historian and historian-described white supremacist.
they understand that how you educate, who wins the writing game, who wins the battle over history, ultimately wins the war. That's the big fight for the UDC.
But their work with children went further than the classrooms. The UDC formed an auxiliary group called the Children of the Confederacy, which was designed to get kids born in former Confederate states to actively participate in their version of history. Group leaders had kids recite call and response truths from something called the Confederate Catechism. Children up to the age of 18 would compete and be rewarded for memorizing long passages of lost cause rhetoric.
So it would be like an after school thing, like that was your club. You would go after school to the meeting of the Children of the Confederacy, and your leader might teach you songs of the South like Dixie or other songs that were considered Southern patriotic songs. They would have them write essays, go visit the veterans, and learn this catechism.
Children were also the centerpiece of their community's monument unveilings, like this living flag at the dedication of the Stonewall Jackson Monument in Richmond. Yes, those are school children. The UDC's efforts shaped the identities of children who grew up with the lost cause. They made history personal, and that made their story last longer.
Generations of children learning that narrative in a variety of ways grow up to be, segregationist in the 50s and 60s, because that's been drilled into them since they were children.
After World War I, the UDC started losing steam.
Always choose to see it through the personal. And I think the UDC, to a great extent, was their goal.
So the next time someone says the Confederate monuments are about remembering our history, just know that that's exactly what the United Daughters of the Confederacy wants you to think.
I'm just about finished, but I hope that you got the gist of what this was about. Because when you take all of those elements that we just saw and add to it the Gone with the Wind, the Klansmen, and all of that, you can see why when you see some of these folks especially out of the South, that are so Trump crazy, you can see why they have so much hatred. It's generational. This has been put in their heads for generations. And so in Trump, they saw a Confederate leader. And a lot of his language was actually encoded from that same thing, from that lost cause rhetoric, which we did not hear the same way. And that's my point. We know that they live in an alternate reality. And it is an alternate reality. It's not just craziness, it's an alternate reality. And it continues to this day. That's why Trump can sit down there and talk about running again. And they talk about he's a force in the Republican Party, because he is. He's part of that alternate reality. And as long as it's one of the problems I have with Democrats who keep talking about, we got to try to find the ways to work with them. You cannot work with people who live in a different reality than you. And they do. They live in a different reality. That's why when they talk, whether it's the politicians or whether it's the people on the street, and you say, what planet are they from? Because they're talking from the reality that they live in. Theirs is different than yours or mine. And they cannot get to our reality, and we can't get to theirs. Now, certain things are happening that may force them out of that alternate reality a little bit, like especially in Texas, where they're finding they're having certain things happen to them that's forcing them to have to deal with the real reality. Okay? But don't expect too much. I'm going to close now. And I want you to keep this, save this, whatever kind of way you save stuff, because I want you to share it, and I want you to come back and walk through it again, because you need to understand how deep this is. It's an alternate reality of the lost cause. And that's part of Trump's whole program. He's tuned into that alternate reality. And that's how come he can keep saying that the election was stolen from him. And some of the politicians, some of the Republicans, you hear them say this. They cannot force the words out of their mouth to say that they don't believe the election was stolen. Wasn't stolen. They talk around it and over it and under it, because that's the part of the lost cause. Trump's 2020 election is the new lost cause. All right? I will talk to you soon. And no justice, no peace, no love. KNOW.